Matthew chapter 2, beginning at the first verse. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi together secretly and found out from them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented unto him gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. Reading to the 12th verse of a portion of God's Word. Today is, well, at least yesterday was Epiphany, traditionally the day that the Wisemen came and saw the young child in the manger. We do not know whether it was 12 days after the birth or whether it was 2 years. And really that doesn't matter. The fact is they came. And in some traditions, Ukrainian and other traditions, that's when they celebrate what we call Christmas, when the wise men came. But we, of course, celebrate earlier, but it's good to remember Epiphany and the coming of the wise men. Why is that important to us? Well, because probably all of us are not Jewish. We're Gentiles. And this was the coming of the Gentiles to see Jesus. Special significance. You see, Jesus was more than just another Jew. Some of the people of his day, following very closely in genealogies, figured that he was just part of the Jewish race, and that was true in a sense, although he was the Son of God, but he came into the Jewish race. He was King of the Jews, as the wise men said there. We notice in verse 1, it said that or verse 2 says they came and said, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews?" He was King of the Jews. But more important, that he is Lord of all. King of kings and Lord of all. No matter what race we are, no matter where we come from. And maybe if we looked into our past, we'd find all kinds of differences. I notice there's a promotion on television of this genealogy thing to look into your past. And I've never been interested in that. I'm afraid of what I might find back there. I don't know, it won't hurt me. But no, I just haven't that interest. I'm more interested where I'm going than where I came from. I am interested in history, but not to that extent my own. Though I've never had an interest in really digging into the past and finding out my gene. But there is a lot of emphasis on that, And sometimes, as we see in those commercials, people get quite surprises. They think that their whole background is in a certain race, and they discover that really they're more of another race. Well, what does it matter? If we know the Lord, we're all children of God, and that's what counts. And if we don't know him, then we are missing something. We need to. But Jesus, though he was born to a Jewish family in this world, put into that Jewish race, the people of God, as they saw it, really came for all of us, Jews and Gentiles alike. And that's the news of the Wisemen coming. Evidently, although we don't know much about them, there's so many traditions have built up around them, and sometimes it's kind of hard to sort out the traditions from the fact, unless we really stick to what the Bible actually says and don't add in a lot of those others, although some of those things are interesting traditions and help to kind of magnify the season a little bit. But these people, we believe, were Gentiles. They came from the east. We don't know where. Some feel around maybe the Baghdad area, what we would now call Iraq, really troubled area, but somewhere there in the Middle East, east of Jerusalem. One day they were studying. These were stargazers, if you like, and one day they were looking off. I think this is east. They were looking out there in their home in the east, and in the heavens that they studied, for they were probably astrologers. A lot of different names given, the wise men, the magi, as the scripture reading we read said, magicians, astrologers, various terms. But they knew the skies. They could interpret a lot. And there was that star that was brighter than all the rest. They recognized it that, now how they interpreted it, I don't know, but they recognized that it was signaling that a king had been born. A very special king. Not just one born into the royal family. There's been a lot of publicity the last few years of the royal family in Britain, you know, and having the first boy born in the family for a while, you know, and Prince George, and then later on the daughter born, and great emphasis there, and people gathering around the palace waiting for the announcement that the child had been born. Great excitement. But he is just king or prince of one nation. But this one that was born, that those wise men recognized this star, this was a very special king. I don't know just how much they knew about it, but somehow they knew that this was a very special person. And they were right, weren't they? He is the most special person that ever was born. Now, I know every parent thinks that their child, especially their firstborn, is the most special one ever. Well, good for them, and keep that thought. But I hate to break any bad news, but there was one more special than your child, or my child, or any other child. It was that one that was born in Bethlehem so long ago. And those wise men in the east recognized that. And they said, we've got to see this child. And they set off. And they came. And they found. The Gentiles were introduced to Jesus. See, the Gentiles were invited to his birth as well as the Jews. As far as we know, on that Christmas night when Jesus was born, Mary and Joseph were of the Jewish race. The shepherds out in the field probably were. Anyone else involved around the scene, and actually they're the only ones that we hear of, but there may have been others there. I don't know whether there was an innkeeper or not. we've got pretty convinced that there was, but he's not mentioned in the Bible. Although I must admit I have preached on him in the past. But now it went to the Gentiles, to the rest of humanity. This good news that God had come in a very special way to visit his people and to bring redemption. See, God planned that Christianity was to be universal. It wasn't just for the Jewish people. And that was a shock to the Jewish people. For they believed that as the chosen people of God, that these things were just for them, and that the Messiah would come just for them. You know, if they read the Old Testament carefully, I know they read it and studied it and memorized it, but somehow they missed a lot of it. If they read it carefully, they'd notice that the prophet said that this news was for all people. And the Jewish people were to be the race to carry that news to others, but they misinterpret it. And don't we sometimes misinterpret some of the things too? We're so glad for God's blessing, but are we using it? Do we realize that the blessings are not to be just enjoyed, but to be shared with others? The good news of the gospel is for all people. And not just those in distant lands that we send missionaries to tell them the gospel, but those around about us, our neighbors, the people we work with, to share by word and example the gospel of Jesus Christ, that they might come to know this good news and experience the presence of God. Yes, God planned that the gospel, Christianity, the good news of Jesus Christ, the way of salvation, was for all people, to be universal. And isn't it great to be part of a church that is so universal as the Church of the Nazarene is? I know some people who get in these independent churches and they're just kind of one congregation and everything kind of wrapped around them, and maybe they send some. But our church is universal. It's spread all over the globe. In fact, there are more members of the Church of the Nazarene outside of North America now than there are inside. We have 600 and some odd thousand members in North America, but we have 800,000 or so in other lands, scattered all around the world, sharing the gospel. And as we give mission offerings, that's why we have those little cans for an extra offering. Anybody wants to put into that, but sometimes we may give special mission offerings at other times of our own choosing or whatever. It goes to take that gospel all around the world. What a privilege to be part of God's work, spreading the word, because it is for all nations. It's universal. And so those Wisemen saw that star and they followed it. It brought new light into their life. And when we meet Jesus, it brings new light into our lives, doesn't it? These Gentiles came a long way. First verse says that they came from the east. When Jesus was born, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. I think the NIV changes that somewhat. I guess I like the term the wise men from the east because I pastored out west quite a while, and I know in Nipawin there was always several of us pastors that were from the east, and we like to kid some of the others. Well, we're the wise men from the east, you know, come west with the gospel. And of course, they'd always have a better answer for us. But they came a long way. Much further than from Ontario to Saskatchewan. They came from another land, another culture. They came to see him. Unlike the shepherds, who were just outside of Bethlehem in the hillside, around a boat and had a relatively short journey into town. I'm not taking anything away from them, and we preached about them a couple of weeks ago, and they saw and they came. But theirs was a relatively short journey. When they saw the stars, they came that same night and saw the newborn babe. Maybe took an hour or so, I don't know, not very long. But these people journeyed day after day over the hot desert land to come to this one that they had heard about. They'd seen a star in the east, and they followed it. And somehow that star guided them all the way to Palestine, the Holy Land. I'm not sure how they ended up in Jerusalem instead of Bethlehem, although I have a sermon on that too. But how easy it is to get distracted, in what we think is the right way rather than following. And I think that's what happened. The obvious thing was that the king of the Jews would be born in Jerusalem, the city of the Jews, capital, where the king was. And so there they went. They should have kept following the star to Bethlehem. Getting off track a little bit there, but that's another sermon. But they came. The long trip. Was it worth it? Was it worth traveling all that way just to find a newborn? Now, by the time they got there, he wasn't a babe in the manger, although we sometimes get ourselves confused that way. The Bible tells us clearly that they found him in a house as a young child. So it was sometime after, whether it was a week or two, or a month or two, or a year or two, probably less than 2 years, because we know of Herod killing the babies at 2 years and under. So somewhere in that time, these wise men arrived. And they rejoiced when they saw it. But verse 11 says, when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary. They saw the young child. They saw what they had come for, what they had been looking for. Some here are grandparents. And maybe you remember the time when your first grandchild was born, or, well, any grandchild, never mind the first one. And you got word that they were born, and you look forward to the time when you could go and see that child. Maybe you were able to put everything else aside and take off and get there as soon as you could to see that child. And whether it was short church term just across town, or whether you had to travel a long way. And I know some have. To, Ottawa or somewhere like that, or a distance. But, it was worth that trip to go once you saw the child. Maybe traveling, particularly if the weather wasn't bad, or was bad and it was a long way, along the way you might say, I wonder if I should be doing this. Is it worth it? Traveling all this way, this time of year, or what, all the details that we tend to think about. But when you see that grandchild, it was worth it all. And that's the way these wise men. I suspect there may have been sometimes along the journey they may have questioned among themselves, and maybe even said to one another, are you sure we're doing the right thing? Are you sure it's wise to travel all this way just because we've interpreted that star as saying that a special child was born, King of the Jews, and we're not even Jewish? But when they saw the child, it was worth it. And doesn't that parallel our experience? when we met Jesus Christ? Oh, we don't see him as a child in a house or a babe in a manger or those things or in a human form at all. But spiritually, when we met Jesus, what a day. What a transformation. Oh, was worth it all. And some have come a long way to Christ. Some maybe have had the privilege of being brought up in a Christian home. And I like to tell young people, if they've been brought up in it with a Christian home, sure, it may not be perfect, what home is, but what a blessing it is. And how much easier it is to come to know Christ. But there are some that have had to come a long way. Maybe they've been brought up in superstitions, other religions, false teachings. And I don't want to pick on our school system, but I'm afraid that much of what they're being taught in the schools of today is anti-Christian. It not only lacks a Christian message, it's actually opposed to it. Much of it, not all by any means. And so one coming out of that, it's a long way to come to Christ. There are those that have been so bound in sin and bondage, in its bondage. Oh, so they say if we've had that benefit of a Christian home and a Christian influence that's helped us to easily step into it. I read a story a while ago of a man whose young son, I'm not sure the age, but a child, had, I think at a children's meeting or camp, had made a decision for Jesus Christ. And the father was just questioning to see how well he understood what he'd done. And he said, well, why did you do that? And the child said, just seemed like the right thing to do. Only a young child could come up with an answer that good, couldn't he? But why? Because he'd been brought up in a Christian home, and it just seemed the right thing to do to make his own decision for Jesus Christ as a child. But there are those that are brought up in other situations, and it's a long way to come to know Jesus Christ. And those who have been brought up in other religions. And there are many of them around. I'm not talking about other denominations or other branches of Christianity. Not that, but I mean other religions. Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and on it goes. For them to come to know Christ, it's a long journey, and it's a risky journey. I'm sure there were risks for these wise men as they traveled all that way to Jerusalem. And some of the people today, and we don't get it on the news very often, but occasionally we do, but more so from Christian media, we hear of some of these people of Islamic background and whatnot. They accept Jesus Christ, and they are outcasts from their society. Sometimes their very lives are put on the line. We hear of them being killed just because they became a Christian. Hard for us to grasp in our society. But for them, it's a long way to come to Christ. These wise men came a long way. They set an example for us. And the Christ they found in that house still brings light to those in darkness. As they saw the light of that star and followed the light, so he brings light to our life. Remember what Isaiah said in the 9th chapter in the 2nd verse. It says, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow and death, upon them has the light shined. Oh, I trust the light of the gospel has shined into your lives and keep shining. And it will, if you allow it to come brighter, that that light of the gospel, that knowledge of Jesus Christ gets brighter and clearer as we walk with him. And we find these wise men, after they had visited with Herod, and they took off again to Bethlehem. The 10th verse says, when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. They saw the light. What joy it brought. Oh, when we see the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ, when it shines into our hearts spiritually, what cause for rejoicing? You know, we ought to get more excited about our faith and our religion than we usually do. It's an exciting thing. They rejoiced with exceeding great joy. Exceeding joy. Oh, this was exciting. They were on the final journey to find this one that they had traveled so long to meet. A man anywhere needs nothing more than he needs Christ. Oh, people have great needs. Some more so than others. And if we can help those in need, whether they're homeless people, whether they're people battling physical needs or financial needs or whatever it is, if we are able to help them, we need to be doing that. And I think this congregation is very good at doing that. But there's a greater need. You see, there's a lot of talk about solving poverty and getting rid of poverty, and I'm all for that. I grew up in poverty. I guess I didn't know it until later on, but pretty much. And I know it's hard when you don't have enough of the things that we take for granted in life. But if we could solve poverty, if there were no more homeless, there was nobody hungry, we could get rid of sickness, man's greatest need would still be there. They might be well fed and well housed and well provided for, but they'd still be sinners, lost and undone. Dressed up sinners, perhaps, well fed, but no better. You see, the person in the mansion on the hill and Mortgage Row or whatever you want to call it, it's really no better off spiritually than the person down on the bottom of the social ladder, as it were. If they don't know Jesus Christ, it's no better to be rich and healthy and have all the provisions. Oh, yes, we like all those things, and I'm not knocking it at all. I'm all for it. I think it's good to be helping them out. I know there's a lot of controversy now over this minimum wage taking such a jump, and I think maybe it's gone up a little too fast, but that's where it needs to be. The person making $100,000, a week, month, or whatever it is, what is it, those most wealthy people in our land had made more by January 2nd than the average worker will make on the whole year. They don't need a little extra, but it's a guy that's working at the minimum wage that does need a little extra. And I'm all for helping the person get up that way. But if that is all that we're interested in, we're really missing the target or missing the boat or missing something, whatever you want to call it, because they're spiritually no better off. One day we're all going to die and we're not going to take anything with us. We're all going to face the judgment seat of Christ. And so man's greatest need is to come to know Jesus. And that's what these wise men did. They went through all the effort of traveling all that way to meet Jesus. They maybe didn't know all the significance of it, but as we look back, we can see it. And they came, and they met him. The one who can set free from every bondage. Probably didn't look like it as a little child there, but they realized the special activity, special reality of that child. And oh, that we may. He reveals God's will, God's way, and God's provision for us all. And that's what Epiphany, the coming of the wise, Epiphany really means a revealing. Coming of the wise to reveal Christ to the rest of us, to all society. They came, and they found, and they rejoiced, and they returned another way. And I do like the King James Version there a little better, because it says, doesn't they just say went by a different route, but they returned a different way. To me, that's got some significance. Maybe it isn't meant in the original, but when we meet Jesus, really meet Jesus, when we really accept him into our lives and become a child of God, life becomes a different journey. We go out a different way than we came in. Not geographically, but we live a different way because we met Jesus. They met him. They offered their gifts. They worshiped him. And they went another way, you people. No excuse for not coming to Christ. These wise men had every excuse. They had a long way to go and all the other things, but they didn't use the excuses. They came. And so we are invited, Jew, Gentile, whoever, male, female, educated, uneducated, all are invited to come to Christ and receive his blessings. You know, there's one hymn about them in the hymn book. I'd just like to read a verse or so of it. It says, as with gladness men of old did their guiding star behold, as with joy they hailed its light, leading onward, beaming bright. So, most gracious Lord, may we evermore be led to thee. And the last verse says, Holy Jesus, every day keep us in the narrow way. And when earthly things are past, bring our ransomed soul at last, where they need no star to guide, where no cloud shall glory hide. Guide us in your way, O Lord.